Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, welcome to our 5th season, everybody, as we kick off the new year and our 101st episode. Glad to have you here, and glad to have Ian Goepferd, the Vice President of CenTrio Energy, which manages the district steam energy system beneath downtown Seattle that serves 150 buildings and 28.5 million square feet of space, providing heating throughout our downtown. Ian and I talk about the history of this 100-plus-year-old system, how it came to be, how it operates today, and their future growth plans. It's a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate Ian being our first guest on our 5th season here at Seattle City Makers. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Ian Goepferd, Vice President for CenTrio Energy. Well, thanks, Ian, for coming by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, on this wet, dark day here.
At least the rain has let up a little bit.
I know, my goodness. Well, there's not a lot of things in Seattle that are 132 years old. And it's pretty cool to have the history and longevity of this steam system that keeps so much going, and to have an opportunity to talk to you about it. And I was doing a little bit of reading on just kind of how it came about. I didn't realize it was the Great Fire that kind of led to its creation, like the Great Fire led to a lot of utilities and other things that came about in our city.
And I've been studying a little bit too, just to make sure I got my facts straight. And I can't determine if it was coincidental with the Great Fire or if it was a Great Fire that was the impetus, because it was literally months apart, back in 1889 when, that happened. But that was the genesis of the company that's now CenTrio, but was known as Seattle Steam for decades.
Yeah, and the fire created a municipal fire company or fire department, and then a water supply, a Cedar River. And there's a lot of good things that came out of that tragedy that took out our central business district, which was Pioneer Square at the time.
Yeah, there was a 2-year agreement with the city where all the fire water for the city was provided by pumps that were driven by steam in the steam plant down in Pioneer Square. Which I didn't know that either until doing a little bit of research. But a lot of the utilities in the region, Seattle City Light, Puget Sound Energy, all kind of spawned out of what was the Seattle Steam Company 136 years ago.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting history.
So for those that don't know about the utility that is steam that's running through our underground areas of our downtown in particular, help us understand what it is, what it does, who it serves.
Yeah, so district energy doesn't mean much to most folks, but most people know like a furnace in their house, or an air conditioner in their house. And district energy, I think most simply, is removing those pieces of equipment from buildings and putting them in one central plant. So a large furnace, a large air conditioner. Here in Seattle, we just have large boilers which send steam, which could be hot water, to buildings instead of them having their own boilers or furnaces. In many other cities, including Portland, we operate a cooling business in Portland as well that has large chillers, which are big air conditioners effectively, and send cold water, to buildings. So they're very common. There's over, I was trying to figure out the numbers too. There's hundreds of systems, in the United States, and, worldwide, there's probably thousands of systems. And I didn't really know about district energy until I took this role. And now I'm a very big fan and advocate of district energy because there's so many, upsides with, centralizing it, but it's pretty neat. A lot of people don't know about it. I didn't know. I've lived in Seattle since the 90s, and I had no idea we had a district system here.
And that central plant, if you will, happens to be in downtown. And
it's right downtown. Yeah. And, we recently participated in the waterfront grand opening by bringing a steam whistle that was used on one of the trains that it actually was from the train that went up and down the waterfront. 100 years ago. That's no longer there.
Pre-viaduct, back when we had
very much
tracks down there.
Pre-viaduct.
Yeah.
And so we brought that steam whistle, piped it up to our steam plant, and we were blowing that. We had let kids and passerby pull the steam whistle.
This was in early September when
it was during the grand opening. Yeah, it was pretty fun. We thought we might get shut down by the police, but they never showed up. So
were you exceeding the noise ordinance?
I think so.
For a good cause.
Yeah, we let our neighbors know.
It was educational.
Know. Yeah, we did. We let our neighbors know. There's an apartment building right next door. And
come out here.
Yeah, we told them. We said, come on out. And it was in partnership with the Northwest Railway Museum. So we gave them free passes, and that worked pretty well.
Yeah, very cool. And so there's miles and miles of pipe that run from that plant to customers throughout our center city.
We've got about 20 miles of pipe, most of it underground. We have, we cover most of downtown, all up through the business district into First Hill, and a lot of First Hill, up to Broadway is served by our system. All three hospitals up on First Hill are customers of ours and have been since the 1960s. So a pretty big network.
And how getting more specifically into the system, how do the mechanics of it all work for like the lay person?
It's actually really simple, which is one of its benefits. So we have boilers in our plant down on the waterfront.
Mm-hmm.
We have another plant with just one boiler in Pioneer Square. That's that building was built. The beautiful building in Pioneer Square was not built in 1889. It was built like 10, 15 years later. But that, old Gothic building was really where, the business started. But so we generate steam with boilers. We send it into pipes, those 20 miles of pipes. Those pipes connect into buildings. They use it for heating, for hot water. Hospitals also use it for sterilization. We've got several customers like the Seattle Art Museum and the Fry Art Museum. They use that for humidification. So they've got works of art, and artifacts, and they want to keep them at a constant humidity level to protect them. So lots of different uses. We've also got some, interesting, customers like Copperworks Distillery. We've got Beecher's Cheese. We've got Old Stove Brewing. Other interesting businesses that have been fixtures. The Pike Brewing Company used to be a customer. They're idle currently. Fremont Brewing, I think, is brewing their beer now, but I'm sure there'll be another business back in there, doing their own craft brewing pretty soon. But
are folks like Copperworks and Beecher's, are they using for heat or for other?
Mostly for process. So the distilling that's done for Copperworks is done using steam,
which is just not too far from the.
It's just a block away.
Plant itself, yeah.
It's just a block away.
Short pipe.
It is, yeah. And then, the customers, like Beecher's Cheese and the breweries, in Pike Place Market, they use it to heat up the kettles that they use to either brew beer, or part of the cheese making process involves heating the curds in whey to help them, separate. I don't know much about making cheese, but they've got a couple large steam kettles, and Beecher's recently just doubled their cheese production capacity. And so we've been helping them expand their business there. That's been really fun.
Very cool. All these things that are happening above ground, served by this incredible system underground that many of us don't see or may not be aware of.
Yeah, yep.
How unique is Seattle's, and particularly our downtown and center cities system relative to other urban areas in the U.S.?
I don't know we're all that unique, except maybe the age of our system.
Yeah.
I mean, there are systems that maybe get close to how old our system is, but 1889, 136 years ago, when we started, that was probably one of the first systems. I haven't found one that has an older.
Yeah, I shortchanged you. I said 132, but it's 100. It's 136.
It is 136. Yeah.
Let's make sure to get that right. Older than the market, older than a lot of things in town.
We are. I mean, not much, of current Seattle existed, whether it's businesses or, but we do have a lot of buildings that, are still. Pioneer Square is where the initial business originally served. And I think one of the things that helped rebuild the city after the Great Fire was the fact that it was less expensive to put buildings in without the infrastructure required for heating, because all the buildings had the original type of radiator like you'd see in a 100-year-old house. And
like,
it was
not quite like these, but
very close to that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And so that made it really much more easy to build all the buildings. So you didn't have to figure out how to get coal or, oil into the buildings. They didn't have to have that space. They could do it all just by connecting to the steam network. So pretty visionary.
super efficient.
It's very efficient, good use of space within buildings. All of our customers are buildings, even if they make, whiskey or cheese, they're still, it's a building. It may have a process, maybe heating, maybe hot water, but, there's a lot of advantages for all, buildings to remove infrastructure, and that gives more leasable space. It allows for less, overhead costs, to maintain the building. So there's some real upsides. And the district energy business was something that was booming, 130 years ago and growing for probably, 75 years. And in this country, folks, when new heating, ventilating, air conditioning, HVAC technology came around, stopped building systems. They were expensive, large upfront cost. And so investment approaches were different. And a lot of buildings started moving away from connecting to systems. Europe, however, continued to build systems. And there are, I think if you look at a per capita basis or, city, the number of cities on a proportional basis in Europe, there's a lot more systems.
Is that because space was at even more of a premium in some of those cities of smaller residential units, smaller office spaces?
I think that's part of it, but I think another part of it is a mentality. I'm going to generalize, but Europeans are more community focused. They do things for the greater good. What makes the most sense for all of us? Well, let's do that. We, in this country, have a slightly different perspective on things.
A little more individualism.
Very much so.
That extends to our energy use, right?
Just about everything, I think.
Right.
And
I want to decide what unit I'm going to have in my building or residential space and control it. And,
independence, the ability to make your own decisions and not be, tied to the community. I'm seeing a distinct change, both in the state and nationally. Our friends up in Vancouver, BC, there's 4 district systems in Vancouver, operated by 4 different entities, and there's more growing. That's trickling down into, the United States. Folks are recognizing the benefits of doing things at scale. And it's, people are, I think, changing their mentality a little bit about, this really is good. Municipalities are deciding, this is good for us because it's good for managing costs for all of our constituents, or if you're a utility for customers. So there's a lot of shift that's moving things in the right direction. And plus, decarbonization is pretty big in many parts of the country, especially here in Washington. And to achieve a transition away from fossil fuels, if you can do it with a district system, you're changing one system. So we convert our boilers to electricity. That's right now we have 139 buildings on our system. That's 139 buildings that don't need to go through that conversion.
They're not making their own
themselves.
Individual decisions and investments.
And so now when we're at a decision point like that, it really shows the benefits of doing things at scale. So it's pretty exciting time for us.
I imagine reliability is a huge benefit too of district systems.
It really can be. And because we have 3 hospitals on our system, including Harborview, which is a level 1 trauma center, they need to be operational. And because we can install, we don't just have 1 boiler, we've got 5, and we don't need all 5. So we have some built-in reliability. Yeah. We also have, we probably don't need 20 miles of piping underground, but we have that. So there's 2 paths to every building. And hospitals have multiple connections. So there's a lot of different ways to get
How do you mean 2 paths?
So we have, 2 main routes that steam is like electricity. It just goes where the wires go, or in our case, where the pipes go. So we could shut down half of our system and still serve all of the hospitals. So if we had a leak or if we needed to do maintenance, we don't need to interrupt service at all for the hospitals or for any customer for that matter. Very rarely do we need to, shut down a customer for any period of time. And that is a big benefit. So if you have a furnace in your building and it goes out, well, you're going to wait till it gets fixed. So we have the ability to just reroute steam, if there's a problem with the piping system. And because we have multiple boilers, we can make sure that all the steam keeps flowing, and the heat and the hot water and the sterilization, the humidification. It sometimes works to our disadvantage because it's so reliable that people don't know much about it, and it gets overlooked quite a bit. And
you're not subject to storms and floods and wind and all the other things that affect other energy distribution, I imagine.
Not as much. I mean, it helps having our infrastructure underground. It doesn't really, get impacted by much. There's no, trucks hitting a, lake pole and taking out the wires. So that helps. Yeah.
What does the next decade look like for CenTrio here in Seattle?
So we're in, I think, in an exciting inflection point because we're focusing on transitioning off of fossil fuels. That allows us to both manage that for our customers. There's both city and state regulations that are driving buildings towards moving away from fossil fuels, so we can help support that. But that also allows us to potentially grow the system, and the number of customers, because buildings that aren't on our system today that have to figure out how to comply with the fossil fuel transition requirements will be looking at options and will be a quite a viable option for those buildings. So we're pretty excited to help that. We're very aligned with both the city and state regulations. We certainly believe that it's time to move away from fossil fuels, and so we think we can have an even bigger impact by being ahead of the curve there. And we're trying to be proactive, get our decarbonization done so that buildings that aren't on our system will have us as an option when they are at the point where they have to make that transition.
And how are the boilers powered today and fueled relative to where you're
can I go back in history a little bit?
Yeah. Please.
So when this business started, it was entirely coal. All the steam that was generated was made using coal. And through many transitions,
coming in on those trains, I imagine, on the waterfront.
Trains on the waterfront, dropped off at the plant, down in Pioneer Square. I mean, lots of trains, and lots of trains pulling ash, out of the business, as well, to dispose of it. For a number of reasons, that the transitions were made, over the years to move to. It was actually bunker C fuel oil, which is the fuel oil that old ships used to use. Was the first transition, and then the boilers were transitioned to use diesel fuel, which was cleaner and and actually had higher energy content. And then in the 1970s, natural gas became the primary fuel. Each step along the way, there were elements of trying to be more climate friendly. I mean, people didn't think the same way as they do today, but if you find old pictures of Seattle from the 1900s, it was dingy and smoky, and people were concerned about that in the 1900s, and that's one of the reasons that people transitioned. And so today we are primarily natural gas. In fact, we exclusively burn natural gas, except if there was a problem with the natural gas system, when we could burn diesel fuel as a backup. And that's a reliability, mechanism for us. That's why we have an alternate fuel. So our next transition would be bringing electric service, additional electric service to our plant, putting in at first an electric boiler, and then we'll run that with natural gas as a backup,
tying into City Lights.
We are
system.
We are doing that, and we're currently a small customer. We're going to be a relatively large customer here, soon. In fact, we just met with them yesterday, working on, how we're going to make that happen in the next couple of years.
And you're not plugging that electric boiler into a 120 volt outlet. You've got some infrastructure.
We are not. Yep. So, Seattle City Light has most of their infrastructure underground downtown as well, which is, one of the reasons we have such reliable electric service downtown. So we'll be building our own circuit with Seattle City Light from the Denny substation, up in South Lake Union down to our plant. And it'll be a dedicated circuit to power a 25 megawatt boiler. So that's about 25,000 houses worth of electricity, just to put that in context.
To support that boiler.
Yeah. And
which is supporting a ton of your customer base and thousands of people on the other end.
Yeah, there's a lot. And once we put that boiler in, we'll actually be able to reduce our CO2 emissions by over 50%. So that's kind of our primary goal. And our long-term plans are to make better use of that 25 megawatts by installing equipment that has, higher efficiency. Heat pumps are pretty common. A lot of people have them in their homes. Well, you can get those at industrial scale that actually can generate steam instead of just, warm air for your, furnace or hot water. And that's what our second phase, that's probably 10 years out. And that would allow us to use Elliott Bay as a heat source. It sounds a little bit crazy, but, we would be able to pull, pretty large quantities of water into a heat exchanger, remove heat from it.
Straight from the bay.
Straight from Elliott Bay, and then send that water back to Elliott Bay colder than we found it, which moves the temperature of the ocean in the right direction. One of the things with climate change is water temperatures in the ocean are rising. So we'd be able to, help do that. That's a side benefit, but for us, it would be a thermal energy source that allows us to, probably double or maybe even triple the amount of steam we can make with the amount of electric service that we have. That'll get us to, almost zero in terms of carbon emissions. So
what are the regulatory hurdles you have to overcome to do that? I mean, is that Department of Ecology and all shoreline permits? And
it is all of that.
Imagine that is not just going to throw your own pipe in the sound here. And
nobody's done that before.
Yeah.
Often, water, whether it's from lakes, rivers, or the ocean, is used for cooling equipment. And so you'd put water back, warmer. That's currently, not in favor. Was very popular for a lot of years, but we've recognized that actually, harms the aquatic life. And so I actually just read the city put out a little bit of I guess it was a white paper on the aquarium. And so the aquarium is actually thinking of doing the exact same thing. I mean, they already pull water out of Elliott Bay.
Right, for the tanks.
And everything. Yeah. And they're probably going to use that same system. And before they put that water back into Elliott Bay as part of their electrification process, they're going to extract heat out of it to heat their spaces and then put the water back, colder than they took it out. So they'll probably be ahead of us in permitting. But you asked, the agencies, certainly Department of Ecology, there is a, shoreline permit. The tribes are, entities that, we have yet to consult with, but our pathway will be, working through, probably tribes first and, make sure that the things we're contemplating align with their values. And if we find some alignment there, which we think we will, then, we'll move on to permitting from that point. So we've begun the planning. We've got some consultants that have looked at what the permitting could be or should be based on what we do know, but because no one's done it, there's really no established pathway. So should be challenging, but fun project to work on. So we have a few years to get through that. That is super
cool. And to, at one end of downtown, have that type of project. And then the other end, we've got, data centers heating Amazon buildings with the Weston Data Center Tower and pipes under 6th Ave, taking excess heat to put it in buildings for people.
Yeah, I'm glad you know about that. Many people don't, because that's its own mini district energy system.
Right.
And, it was built, expressly for that purpose. How do we use that waste heat from the data center, beneficially? And like you said, some of Amazon buildings are exclusively heated by, the waste heat from that. Yeah, it's a pretty neat system.
Yeah, and not a lot of downtowns that can throw a pipe in a big body of water to pull heat out of it.
No, there's actually 2 other district systems in the country, one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, another in San Francisco, that are planning very, very similar projects. So we feel like we're in good company with our plans.
Is Vancouver doing anything like this?
I don't think they are. I think they are doing some, what's called, I don't know if Vancouver's got deep lake cooling. Toronto has a deep lake cooling system. I mean, they have such a large lake, that they're not impacting. They're taking water from, I don't know what the specifics are, 100 feet deep, and using it for cooling, buildings and putting it back a little bit warmer. But with a large body of water like they have, they're not, really impacting the aquatic life, in a negative way, and they monitor that. But I don't think Vancouver's got anything like this. They may have plans, though. There's a couple district energy companies that are at work up there, really working hard to be environmentally friendly and work on those transitions. So it wouldn't surprise me if they've got similar ideas.
And cooling's not a service you all currently
not in Seattle.
Provide, yeah.
No. And
is there, do you see that as the system set up in a way where you can evolve to provide that service? I mean, the air conditioning demand across the city, you look over the last 30 years and how how greatly it's grown. Are you getting that pressure to think about how you can provide that service, or
we're
not possible?
Yeah, we're not set up well, and we're not getting the pressure, but we really think that's the direction that, would benefit the city, for us to move. I mean, we're all noticing, that, the temperatures are rising and the need for air conditioning is, growing. I still don't have air conditioning in my house. When I bought my house in the 90s, I didn't really mind. It's become, a little bit less tolerable as the summers have gotten warmer. And, most buildings downtown do have air conditioning of some sort. And but when you go to First Hill, there's a lot of older, smaller buildings, or down to Pioneer Square that do not have air conditioning. And so part of our, growth plan is, figure out how we can add cooling. And one of the benefits, if you have a combined heating and cooling system, is you can use technology like heat pumps to, instead of injecting energy into the system, you just transfer it. Because buildings do heat and cool at the same time. And if you can just move that, thermal energy around instead of having to run a separate, air conditioner and a separate furnace, you can save a lot on energy costs. And that's good for all of us, especially with constraints on electricity that we're hearing about that are coming pretty soon.
Oh, thanks. So how did you get into this line of work?
I had no intent of joining, a district energy company. I didn't even know what district energy was before I was approached for this role. I spent most of my career in electric power generation. I worked for a company based in Issaquah for a lot of years, and then a few other companies that were, owning, operating, or working in the power plant, electric generating power plant business. And a friend of mine was interviewing for the position that I now have, and for reasons that were external to this, this company, decided not to take the job. But he said, "Oh, you should talk to Ian." And he's a guy that I worked with, many times over the years. And I said, "Oh, sure, I'll take the interview." And initially I was like, this doesn't seem very interesting. And then the more I learned about it, I was like, this is pretty neat, what's going on here in the city that I've lived in for over 30 years and didn't know.
Yeah, what was your knowledge of the system before you?
Zero. But the reason I was so interested in the job was, I worked in the power business while we first started transitioning plants from coal to natural gas. And that was a big shift. And that was 20 years ago. And over time, even though I've been working in that industry, I've recognized, we do need to have insiders in the energy industry working on the energy transition. There's a lot of resistance in that industry to preserve the jobs and the infrastructure and the companies that are doing that. But there's also great opportunity to, bring that expertise that exists to businesses that are working on decarbonization. So I was interested because it was a opportunity to manage that sort of transition. And that's what really drew me here, was just knowing that, that was something that, we could accomplish. It's a little challenging, but, that would be something that would be a long lasting benefit, for Seattle, and would be something I'd feel pretty good about. So that's what interested me.
And when you kind of look across the energy sector and the Climate Commitment Act and the transition we're going through across the state, what's sort of the snapshot of kind of where we sit today and what you see as some of the key challenges to the years ahead of making these transitions? And there's been a lot of articles and headlines of late around some of those, but how would you, to kind of the layperson, of sort of the state of energy within our state?
Yeah, I think we have a very aligned thinking, from the city, through the county to the state level on, what we want to do about climate. So that's, presuming you agree with it, that's great, because that alignment means, businesses can make plans. They know where everybody stands, because we have some divergence, between federal and state, priorities, and that creates some confusion in terms of how businesses navigate regulations. So in this state, we've got, pretty good regulatory alignment. So for those who don't know, Climate Commitment Act, it's a a regulation that governs carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a cap on the number of CO2 emissions that are allowed in the state. And that cap decreases. Entities buy carbon allowances, and those allowances are going to decrease over time down to zero by 2050. So that drives businesses to do things like we're doing. Let's move away from fossil fuels, move into electrification. City has its own standard for buildings that requires them to also transition away from fossil fuels and carbon emissions. So that alignment for us is positive because it lets us make good business decisions
Mm-hmm.
and move forward. The challenge is that we're faced is that it's expensive, and the energy infrastructure in the Northwest is not fully built out, to handle that. And that's not it's not a singular problem. It's not a Seattle problem to solve. It's not a King County problem to solve. It's not even a state of Washington problem to solve because a lot of the infrastructure is federal. EPA, Bonneville Power Administration, has quite a bit of authority, and we in the state need the support of BPA to help support the electrification, and then also building the clean energy plants that are required. That takes time and money. And so I think the policies are aligned in a way that support what we want to do from a climate perspective. Infrastructure, including CenTrio, we need to catch up and getting the clean energy that we need. So I think that's our biggest challenge is figuring out, and that's not just CenTrio's challenge. I mean, every industry, even homeowners, right? I mean, we have electric cars, and we maybe transitioning our own homes from fossil fuel to electrification. Once you add up all the additional demands on the system at scale, it's challenging. And so I think working with the city and the state and the other federal entities to make that happen is something that's a real priority for us. And so we're pretty active in government affairs, trying to both support those entities that are working in that direction, but also, make sure that our customers, which are the buildings downtown, get the, treatment that they need, so that their costs are managed as we're moving through this transition.
Do you think the policymakers appreciate sort of the complexity cost of implementation?
I don't think they ever do. But that being said, the ones we've spoken with are open to being, educated. That sounds a little arrogant, but it's good that we have policymakers, folks that aren't, constrained. I'm an engineer by education, and sometimes we go to the problem first rather than the solution. And so policymakers are, looking out in the future and saying, this is where we want to be. Let's write that policy. Everyone that we've talked to said, okay, well, maybe it's not perfect. So let's talk about what we can do to help, amend the policy to allow, in our case, CenTrio, but other entities, like the University of Washington has a network, distribution steam network about the same size as ours, fewer miles of piping for the campus, right here in Seattle. And so we work closely with them, on policy and figuring out how do we align our, what we believe are the technological solutions with policy. And, they have, active government affairs folks as well. And we're finding a lot of receptivity. If we come up with solutions that can be enacted by just a slight change in policy, folks are willing to listen. So we're spending a lot of effort there, working on partnerships with those that are in policy. And we found that to be very productive.
So how do you get a really long extension cord from your new boiler to the Denny substation through downtown?
Well, we haven't done it yet, but so Seattle City Light has a large network of ducts underground in which they have wires. They're not all full. And so for us, it was a matter of working with Seattle City Light to identify a pathway in that duct network that would allow us to put in the conductors that are required to bring us the power. So we did a study with Seattle City Light. They did a process they call proofing. So they prove that this path is viable. They actually run not the full size cables, but they run kind of like running a fish tape if you're doing electrical work in your home, right? To make sure that
be able to pull it,
right? And make sure that they'll be able to pull the wire. So they spent quite a bit of time making sure that pathway is viable, and we're just working out the last details with them now about all the equipment that's required to make sure that the circuit works as expected and is up to the standards that are required for reliability for the downtown network.
I was pulling some wires through my wall the other day to hook up a turntable, and then the tape came apart.
Uh-oh.
And so then it was stuck so I hope they don't run into that challenge.
No, I think they might have better
tape
equipment than you do.
Yeah, I think that's right. The turntable's operational, though. My son and we got it figured out.
That's good.
Well, a couple standard questions to close here. And this has been fascinating. I've learned a ton about a system I knew that existed, but I didn't know exactly the ins and outs of it under our feet here and in these great buildings downtown. And so it's been great talking to you. But I want to close out with a couple of standard questions. First, what was your first job that you took a paycheck for?
I had to think a bit about this because I knew this was a standard question. And, I had all the typical, paper boy, those sort of routes. But I think my first job that I received a paycheck was working as a stock boy at a company called Sam's Club.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever heard of Sam's Club?
Yeah.
Do they still exist?
I think so, right? Is there one up on Aurora still?
I think there might be. They were the precursor to both, Walmart and, Costco, way back when.
Yeah.
And I was stocking shelves, but the highlight of that job
Did you get to drive a forklift?
I did.
Yeah.
That's what I was just going to tell you. The highlight was I got to get forklift certified and drive a forklift.
Oh, you got certified.
And I wasn't the one that knocked the fire valve, and flooded the warehouse. That was somebody else.
So my first job that I took a paycheck for was also in a warehouse driving a forklift.
Yeah.
Not at Sam's Club, but for a pull tab distributor.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know you could get certified. I don't think they cared. And I ran into all kinds of things, but never
that's good.
a valve of any kind.
Yeah, that was pretty frightening. Yeah, but I'm glad it wasn't me.
And then our final question to conclude, what's your perfect Saturday in Seattle?
So I think most of the time I spend my Saturdays doing chores, but and I like to get out of the city. But if I'm going to be in the city, I think, so Seattle has some great urban parks. Discovery Park, Carkeek Park are probably my favorites. I like to hike, and that's what I like to get out of town to do when I can. But you can put in some miles and see some really, nice scenery at both of those parks. So I'd probably start, with a hike. I'd take a little time to recoup from that, and then probably dinner out downtown with the family. And now that I've been working downtown, I spend a lot more time coming downtown. I found it to be, and then we as a family do that quite a bit as well. But then I finish the night off with either a concert or a night at the theater. And as we were talking about earlier, we're going to go see Elf tonight at the Fifth Avenue Theater.
Awesome.
So this will be a Friday, but not a Saturday, but work our way into the weekend.
Yeah, it sounds like a great, perfect Saturday. And speaking of parks, we should mention your service on the Freeway Park Association board. How'd you get connected to them?
Yeah, thanks for that. So, Freeway Park, interesting fact, we have steam pipes that run, to First Hill. And one of them is on Seneca Street that goes through Freeway Park.
Mm-hmm.
So Freeway Park, for those who don't know, is a lid over Interstate 5. And part of that park includes one of our steam pipes. But that's just a connected fact. So I grew up in Minneapolis, and there's a park that was designed by the same architect in Minneapolis called PV Plaza. Huh. And, I had always...
Is that in their downtown or close to it?
Right in downtown on the Nicollet Mall, if you're familiar with Minneapolis. And when my kids were young, the Seneca Plaza building there had a preschool in it, and it still did up until just about a year ago. And we had our kids in that preschool, and they got to play in Freeway Park. and I learned about Freeway Park Association. I thought, this is a treasure in downtown Seattle. And much like, DSA activates Westlake Park, the Freeway Park Association was started to help preserve that park and make it into what it's, was intended to be. And there's actually a large project going on now, a big capital project to improve the park, restore restrooms, restore some of the vegetation and
10 million or so of capital investment, right?
Yeah, there is. And I'm actually going there tonight. They're lighting their own tree lights tonight, Twinkle Twinkle. So if you're not doing anything this evening, come to the park.
Oh, terrific.
But I just really wanted to, find a way to, support, the revitalization of, what's going on downtown. And I think having parks that people feel comfortable in and are used, preaching to the choir here, are, something that really, helps with that. And that park is so uniquely situated right between two neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And, it gets a lot of foot traffic. And the more we make that park accessible, I think the more people we're going to see out and the more comfortable people feel beyond downtown. And that's really what, drove me to want to support that organization.
That's awesome. Thanks for your service there. Look forward to seeing it lit. I'm often on 8th Avenue because I live at one end of it. So I love coming through there this time of year and just seeing the
should be all lit up tonight.
Lit up. Well, thanks again for making time for this. Learned a ton and great to connect with you and have you on Seattle City Makers again.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks much.
Well, thanks, Ian, for joining me on our 5th season of Seattle City Makers. Hope you enjoyed my conversation. I learned a ton. Hope you did too. A fascinating system, and glad to have it in the building I'm sitting in and recording. We are a customer of CenTrio and appreciate their heat on these cold Seattle January days. We'll want to close out with a tip for something to check out downtown, and want to lift up the 35th floor observatory bar at the Smith Tower, which has been just a terrific spot for a beverage. And they've started doing some intimate concerts up there. I got to one last month put on by Marcus Lolario, and they hosted the lead singer of Band of Horses, Matt Broke, and it was fabulous. And I hear more are coming. Not an official calendar out yet, but keep an eye on more intimate concerts coming to the 35th floor of the Smith Tower here in the new year. I hear more will be scheduled, and it was just a treat to be up there with about 100 or so other folks enjoying music with a great view of the city and great food and drink. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Thread Theory.